The hall of the Galactic Council was filled with light that never flickered. It was made of silver stone and floating orbs that glowed like moons. Yet that day the air was cold with judgment. Every being in the chamber turned their eyes toward the center platform, where Virel of Lysara stood, tall, proud, and trembling only inside her heart. Once, Virel had been respected across the galaxy. She was a scientist, a leader, and a widow of a brave Lysaran pilot who had died during the wars with Earth. Her mind had always believed in reason, not violence, but the war had changed everything. The Lysaran Empire saw humans as a danger, a race that spread too fast, loved too deeply, and broke too many rules. To them, humans were chaos in flesh. And yet when Virel was sent to oversee the capture of Earth soldiers after the final skirmish near the moon of Traven, something inside her refused to follow the order. The command was cruel. She was to hand the human captives to the military labs for testing. But when she looked into the frightened eyes of the young men begging for mercy, she disobeyed. She freed them and told them to run. Now that act of mercy stood as her crime. The council's voice echoed through the chamber. "Virel of Lysara," the head counselor said, his tone sharp like frozen metal. "You have violated the Empire's command. You spared the enemy and endangered your people. Do you deny this?" Virel lifted her chin. Her voice was calm, though her heart pounded. "I do not deny it. I saw no honor in cruelty. I saw no wisdom in taking lives that offered no threat." "Mercy is not weakness," gasps spread through the crowd. No one spoke against the council before. It was like watching lightning argue with the storm. "Mercy," the counselor repeated, his voice filled with cold amusement. "You speak of mercy to humans? They who destroy their own world? They who pollute and kill in the name of progress?" Virel did not look away. "They also create music. They raise children. They cry when they lose what they love. We call them dangerous because they feel too much. But perhaps that is what we have forgotten, how to feel." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. The counselor's eyes glowed blue as he raised his staff. "Enough. Your words are poison to the unity of our empire." Then came the sentence. The voice of the council was ancient and powerful, carried by the translator orbs that hung above. "Virel of Lysara, for your disobedience you are hereby exiled to Earth, the very world of the race you protect. You will be bound to a human male under the laws of the old exchange protocol. You shall live among them as property, not partner. Your punishment is to walk among what you pity." The hall erupted in whispers and shock. No one had ever been sentenced like that before. Exile was one thing, but being bound to a human? It was beyond disgrace. Virel stood frozen. She felt the ground tilt beneath her, though the chamber never moved. Bound to a human? To live on Earth, stripped of her status, her honor, and her place among her people? It was worse than death to many Lysarans. She closed her eyes, remembering the face of her late husband, the one she had lost long ago in the war. "They can take my world," she whispered to herself, "but not my conscience." Her guards approached, tall in silver armor, and placed the exile band around her wrist. It glowed red, a symbol of punishment that could not be removed until her sentence ended. She was led away through the corridor of light as the crowd looked down in silence. Outside, the stars of Lysara burned white and distant. The ship prepared for launch. Virel looked back one last time at her homeworld, its glowing oceans and crystal towers. She felt no tears and only a deep, quiet ache that wrapped around her chest like cold glass. The ship's engines roared. A moment later, she was carried across the galaxy, toward the blue planet she once pitied. Now her new prison, far away on that same blue world called Earth, a man named Elias Crane was working on an old solar truck in the dry heat of the desert. His hands were rough from years of fixing machines, his eyes tired but gentle. He lived alone, surrounded by broken engines and wide skies. Elias wasn't a man of many words. He'd once dreamed of leaving Earth, of joining the new colonies beyond Mars, but life had its way of keeping him grounded. He'd lost family in the war, brothers, friends, all to a conflict that had started far beyond human understanding. Now he preferred silence. He fixed things that no one else cared to fix. That night, as the sun sank below the red horizon, he felt a strange hum in the air, a vibration deep enough to rattle his tools. The wind shifted, the sky flashed green for a moment, and then a burning object tore across the heavens. He shielded his eyes. The object fell not far from his workshop beyond the old ridge. The ground trembled when it hit. Elias stood frozen for a heartbeat, then grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the smoke. He expected wreckage, maybe an asteroid. But as he reached the crater, he saw something far more impossible. A silver pod cracked open like an egg, and a figure inside it struggling to breathe. The figure was tall, slender, and strange. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Her hair silver-white like liquid metal. Her eyes, though weak, opened to meet his. For a moment, the whole world seemed to stop. Elias took a cautious step forward. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked softly. The woman tried to speak, but her voice was broken, unfamiliar with the air. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her accent like music from another world. Elias ignored the warning and reached out anyway, helping her sit up. She was shaking, her breathing uneven. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but something deep inside him told him she wasn't a danger. She was lost. "Easy now," he said. "You're safe." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Safe on this world?" she murmured, as if the word itself carried disbelief. He didn't understand what she meant, but he gave her his jacket and helped her to his truck. The desert wind howled around them, carrying dust and silence. That night, as he drove her back to his small home, the stars above them burned bright. The same stars that had watched her fall from grace, and the same stars that would soon witness the beginning of something neither of them could imagine. For the galaxy, it was punishment. For fate, it was a beginning. Elias drove through the desert night with the strange woman sitting silently beside him. The road stretched endlessly under the stars, and the only sounds were the wind and the soft hum of the old truck. The silver glow of the dashboard reflected faintly on her face, calm yet distant, as if her mind was light years away. She hadn't spoken since they left the crash site. Her hands trembled slightly, and every time the truck hit a bump she flinched, unused to the rough movement. Elias noticed her discomfort but didn't ask questions. He didn't want to frighten her more than she already seemed to be. "You must have come down hard," he said finally, trying to make his voice gentle. "Don't worry. I'll get you fixed up at my place. It's not much, but it's safe." She turned her head slowly, studying him as if trying to decode his words. "You help me?" she asked in a soft accent, her voice almost a whisper. "That's what people do," Elias replied simply. The woman looked away again. The word people seemed strange to her ears. She thought of the council's voice echoing in her mind. "You will be bound to a human male. Bound. Sent away. Forgotten." Now she was sitting beside one, breathing his air, hearing his voice, and feeling his kindness. None of it made sense. When they reached his home, a small metal-roofed workshop surrounded by sand and a few rusted machines, the woman stepped out slowly, holding onto the side of the truck. She looked around. The night was wide and quiet, filled with crickets and wind instead of the hum of Lysaran cities. Elias opened the door to his cabin. "Come in, it's warm inside." She hesitated. On her world, humans were called primitive. To enter his home felt like a fall in dignity, a step deeper into her punishment. But the cold bit at her skin and her energy was fading. She followed him in. The cabin smelled of oil, metal, and something else. Comfort. A small stove burned in the corner. On the table were pieces of broken machines, tools, and a few dusty books. The walls were old, but they felt alive, like they had seen years of simple, honest living. Elias poured water into a cup and offered it to her. "Here, drink slowly." She looked at the cup as if it were a weapon. "What is this?" "Water," he said, surprised. "Just water." Varel, though Elias didn't yet know her name, took a cautious sip. The taste was strange, earthy, alive. She closed her eyes. "It's pure," she murmured. Elias smiled faintly. "Best water in the desert. Comes from the old well." He pulled out a small blanket and handed it to her. She didn't know what to do with it at first, but when she saw the kindness in his eyes, she wrapped it around herself and sat near the small fire. For a long time, neither spoke. Elias worked quietly on an engine part, pretending not to watch her, but his curiosity grew stronger each minute. Her skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the firelight, and her eyes reflected a depth he'd never seen in anyone. Finally, he said, "You're not from around here, are you?" She looked up sharply, her instincts alert. Then she softened and said, "No, not from here." "Then where?" he asked gently. She hesitated, glancing toward the window where the stars shone like distant cities. Far, she whispered. So far that your kind does not have a name for it. Elias blinked. He thought she might be delirious from the crash, but something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't madness. It was truth, a truth too heavy for words. All right, he said at last, shrugging slightly.
Far it is.
You can rest here until you're ready to tell me more. That small sentence, and you can rest here, touched something deep in her heart. No one had said that to her since before the war, before the council, before her exile. She didn't thank him aloud, but her eyes softened. The next morning, the desert woke with golden light. The wind carried sand like whispers across the plain. Elias stepped outside to fetch water, and when he returned, he found her standing near the window watching the sunrise. Her expression was filled with quiet wonder. It is beautiful, she said softly. Elias nodded. First time seeing it? First time feeling it, she answered. Our suns are not like this. Too bright, too perfect. This one feels alive. Elias couldn't help but smile. Most folks around here think it's too hot. She tilted her head. Hot, but gentle, like it forgives the cold. He didn't know why her words moved him, but they did. Something about the way she spoke made the world sound new. Over the next few days, she stayed in his home, mostly quiet but watching everything. She studied how he repaired engines, how he brewed coffee, how he spoke to his old dog, Rusty, as if it were a friend. She had never seen such simple peace before, a life built on small acts of care. When Elias offered her food, she accepted only a little. I do not need much, she said. Our bodies are not like yours. But one night, when he played his old guitar, she sat closer to the fire, her eyes softening. The music was rough, uneven, but warm. She had never heard such imperfect beauty before. What is this sound? She asked. It's called a song, Elias replied. Something humans make when words aren't enough. She closed her eyes and listened. It feels like memory. He looked at her and nodded. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Later, when she thought he had fallen asleep, she whispered to herself, they said humans were dangerous, but they never said they were kind. Elias heard it but said nothing. He didn't need to. Her voice carried both confusion and longing, a sound he understood all too well. The days turned into weeks. Slowly, she began to help him around the workshop. Her hands were delicate but precise, and she seemed to understand machines as if she could hear their hearts beating. When Elias saw how quickly she learned, he couldn't help but laugh. You sure you're not some kind of engineer? He joked. She smiled faintly. Something like that. In time, her fear began to fade. She started asking questions about Earth, about humans, about why the world seemed both broken and beautiful. Elias answered with honesty, even when the truth hurt. One evening, as the desert sky burned orange, she stood beside him, watching the wind move across the dunes. Do all humans live like this? She asked. He shook his head. No, some live in cities. Some fight. Some build. We're a mixed lot. She looked at him with quiet curiosity. And you? He smiled, his eyes tired but kind. Me? I just fix what's broken. Her gaze softened. Then maybe. We are not so different. Elias looked at her, puzzled, but before he could ask what she meant, she turned and walked back inside. That night, as the wind howled softly outside and the stars glittered like diamonds, Elias lay awake thinking about her, the stranger from the sky, the one who seemed both fragile and strong. He didn't know her story yet, but something deep inside told him this was no accident. The universe had sent her here for a reason, and though neither of them understood it yet, the bond between them had already begun to form. Quiet, gentle, and unbreakable. The days passed quietly in the desert. The sound of tools, the whisper of wind, and the crackle of the small fire became the rhythm of life inside Elias's little home. The woman from the stars, Varel, had begun to find her place there, though she would never admit it aloud. At first, she had kept her distance. She spoke only when necessary, ate little, and stayed near the window every night, staring at the stars as if they might call her back. But Earth was patient with her. It gave her slow mornings filled with sunlight and nights full of soft sounds. Even the dry wind seemed to teach her something, that silence could be gentle, not cruel. Elias noticed the change. He had stopped trying to understand where she came from. Instead, he treated her as someone who had lost her way and needed space to remember who she was. He taught her small things: how to hold a wrench, how to measure oil, how to tell when a machine was alive by the sound it made. "You listen," he told her one morning, handing her a small metal part. "Every machine talks. Not with words, but with rhythm. If something's off, you can feel it." Varel tilted her head. "On my world, machines do not talk. They obey," Elias chuckled softly. "Maybe that's why they break so easily. Things that obey too much forget how to live." She looked at him curiously. His way of thinking was simple, yet it carried truth that reached deeper than science. Humans, she realized, lived not by perfection but by heart, and maybe that was why they survived so much pain, because their hearts refused to stop. That afternoon, the sun was high and hot. Elias worked on a generator outside while Virel repaired small tools beside him. She had learned quickly. Her movements were precise, graceful, almost musical. "You pick things up fast," Elias said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Learning keeps the mind quiet," she replied. "And quiet is safe." Elias nodded. He understood. Sometimes silence was the only thing that kept a person from falling apart. As the days turned into weeks, Virel began to ask questions, not about machines, but about the world itself. "Why do humans plant seeds?" she asked one evening, "when storms can destroy them?" Elias smiled at the question. "Because maybe the storm won't come. Or maybe it will and they'll plant again anyway." She looked puzzled. "So, they hope?" "Always," he said softly. "That's what keeps us alive." Varel stared at the firelight dancing across the walls. On her world, hope was considered weakness, a distraction from logic. But here, hope was a quiet strength, a flame that refused to die. One night, as the air grew cold, Elias took out his old guitar again. The strings were worn, the sound uneven, but the melody filled the small cabin with warmth. Virel sat near the fire, her eyes following his hands. "What do you call that?" she asked. "A song," he said, smiling. "It's how we remember what words can't say." "Then this is memory?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said. "A good one." For a while he played without speaking. The notes floated gently through the night air. Virel closed her eyes and listened. In that moment she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind forced by rules or duty, but the kind that came from being seen, even by someone who didn't know her past. When the music faded, Elias said quietly, "You must have left someone behind. Someone who's missing you." Virel hesitated. The words caught in her throat. "Yes," she whispered at last. "He was brave. He flew in the sky for our people. He never returned." Elias nodded slowly. "War?" she nodded. Or they sat in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the stars shimmered like soft tears. "I'm sorry," Elias said. She looked at him surprised. "Why? You did not cause it?" "Doesn't matter," he said. "Sorry means I understand what it feels like." His words were simple, yet they reached into the quiet ache of her heart. No one on her world had ever said that to her. No one had cared about how she felt. The next day, she began to help him more around the workshop. When something broke, she didn't just fix it. She improved it. She built small circuits that glowed softly at night and repaired the solar panels on the roof so efficiently that Elias barely recognized them. "You've got a gift," he said, amazed. "I used to build things that flew," she replied quietly. He laughed. "Well, out here, anything that works is just as good as flying." Their days grew into a rhythm: work, food, laughter, silence. And within that rhythm, something invisible began to grow and trust. Virel found herself talking more, sharing stories about her world in fragments. She spoke of oceans made of light, of buildings that sang when the wind passed through them, of a people who had forgotten what kindness felt like. Elias listened with quiet wonder. He didn't interrupt. He never doubted her words, even when they sounded impossible. He could see the truth in her eyes. "Your world sounds beautiful," he said one night. "It was," she answered softly. "But beauty means nothing when there is no heart left to feel it." Her words stayed with him long after she fell asleep. Days later, a sandstorm rolled across the desert. The sky turned red and the air grew thick. Elias rushed to cover his tools while Virel secured the door and windows. When the storm hit, the wind screamed like 1,000 voices. Inside the cabin, they sat near the fire again. The storm outside howled and shook the walls, but inside it was calm. Elias looked at her and said, "You're not scared?" She smiled faintly. I've lived through worse storms. The kind that live inside people. He nodded slowly. Yeah, those are harder to survive. The storm raged all night, but they stayed awake, talking softly. For the first time, Varel spoke about the council, about her exile, about being punished for saving human lives. I thought compassion was strength, she said. But they called it a crime. Elias looked into her eyes. Then they don't know what strength really is. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. He said it not as a man trying to comfort her, but as someone who believed it. After the storm passed, the world outside was quiet again. The sand dunes had shifted, the air was clean, and the horizon glowed with soft morning light. Virel stepped outside, her feet sinking slightly in the sand. She looked at the endless sky and whispered to herself, maybe the stars don't judge us. Maybe they just watch and wait. Elias came to stand beside her. What's that? Nothing, she said, smiling faintly. Just thinking. He smiled too. About going back? She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. No, she said softly. About staying. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed past them, carrying a warmth that wasn't from the sun. Something had changed. Not in the world around them, but inside them both. Virel no longer saw Elias as a stranger. He was a man who had given her peace in exile, and Elias no longer saw her as a visitor from the stars. She was a friend who made his quiet life shine again. Neither dared to name it, but both felt it, the beginning of a bond that even the stars could not break. For months, Elias and Virel lived a quiet, beautiful life, one built on the small miracles of ordinary days. They fixed engines, shared stories, and watched sunsets that painted the sand gold. The loneliness that once surrounded Elias had slowly faded, replaced by laughter and the sound of another heartbeat moving through his world. But Virel knew that silence from the stars never lasted long. Somewhere beyond the sky, her people were watching. The council never forgot. The punishment had a limit. And when that limit ended, they would come for her. Still, she hoped. One morning, she stepped outside to gather water. The air was strangely still. Even the wind seemed to be waiting. Then she felt it, and a vibration under her feet, deep and powerful. The sound grew louder, like thunder from the heavens. She looked up and saw the clouds parting, light breaking through in sharp, unnatural lines. A ship appeared, silver and enormous, its edges glowing faintly blue. The same symbol that marked her exile gleamed across its hull. Virel froze. Her heart stopped for a moment. They had come. Elias ran out, shielding his eyes from the light. What is that? He shouted over the rising wind. She didn't answer. Her hands trembled. The ship descended slowly, its engines kicking up waves of dust that rolled across the desert. The sandstorm of her fate had returned. When the ship finally landed, a hatch opened and 3 figures stepped out. Their armor shone like mirrors. Their faces were hidden behind glass masks. The leader spoke in a deep metallic voice that echoed through the air. Virel of Lysara, the voice boomed. Your punishment term has ended. You are to return to the council for reconditioning and reassignment. Elias looked at her, confused. What do they mean? She turned to him, her voice breaking. It means they came for me. My time here, it's over. No, Elias said quickly, shaking his head. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to. Virel's eyes filled with sadness. You don't understand. My life is bound to their laws. If I refuse, they'll... Before she could finish, one of the soldiers stepped forward. Human male, he said sharply, stand aside. The subject is under Lysaran jurisdiction. Elias moved in front of her. She's not your subject, he said firmly. She's a person. The alien soldier raised a hand, a beam of blue light forming at his wrist. Do not interfere. But Elias didn't move. His heart pounded, his body shaking, but he stood his ground. You can't just take her like that. The leader tilted his head slightly. You protect her? You who were nothing but her punishment? Elias clenched his fists. Maybe I was meant to be her punishment, he said, but she became my reason to live. For a moment the air stood still. The soldiers hesitated. Even Virel looked at him stunned. She had never seen anyone speak to the Lysaran like that, not even among her own people. The leader's voice hardened. Emotional weakness, predictable. He turned toward Virel. You have bonded with the human. That is violation of council order. You will be taken for reconditioning. Something inside Virel snapped. For months she had been learning from Elias, learning what courage truly meant. She stepped forward, standing beside him. No, she said firmly. I will not go. The leader raised his staff. You defy the council again? Virel took Elias's hand. Her touch glowed faintly, a soft golden light spreading across their skin. The soldiers froze. They recognized the glow, the forbidden power of a bond pulse, a link that joined two living souls. The leader's voice shook. You know what you are doing, Virel. If you complete this bond, your life will be tied to his. If one of you dies, both will. Virel's eyes were calm. Then so be it. The light around their hands grew brighter until it filled the desert with warmth. Elias didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could feel it, her heartbeat merging with his, their breaths aligning, their energy becoming one. When the glow faded, Virel stood taller, stronger. The exile mark on her wrist vanished, burned away by the bond's power. She looked at the leader and said, I am no longer under your law. My life is my own. The soldiers stepped back uncertainly. The leader's voice faltered. You would throw away immortality for this world? For him? Virel smiled softly. For kindness. For choice. For love. The things your world forgot. Elias squeezed her hand. His throat was tight, his chest heavy, but his voice was steady. She's not going anywhere. The leader stared at them for a long moment. Then without another word, he turned and walked back toward the ship. The other soldiers followed. As the engines roared to life, Virel and Elias stood side by side, the desert wind swirling around them. The ship lifted slowly into the sky, disappearing into the clouds until it became only a faint light and then nothing. Silence returned. Only the sound of the wind remained. Elias turned to her. They're gone, he said softly. You're safe. Virel's eyes shimmered, not with fear but with emotion. No, she said, placing a hand on her chest. We're safe. You and I. He smiled, though his heart still raced. What did you do back there? She looked down at their joined hands. I gave us the same life thread. If they tried to take me, they would destroy us both. It was the only way to make them understand. Elias exhaled slowly. You risked everything. She shook her head gently. No, Elias, I chose everything. That night the stars looked closer than ever. The desert was quiet, but in that silence, there was strength. The strength of two souls who had faced the whole galaxy and refused to let go. As they sat near the fire, Elias looked at her and said, So what happens now? Virel smiled faintly. Now we live. He chuckled softly. Simple as that? Yes, she said, gazing into the flames. Simplicity is the hardest thing to find. But once you do, it becomes everything. The firelight flickered across her face, soft and calm. Elias couldn't help but stare. He had never believed in destiny, but tonight, sitting beside her, it felt like destiny had believed in him. For Virel, the exile had become freedom. The punishment had become purpose, and the human she had once been forced to live with had become the heart she didn't know she was missing. In the deep quiet of the night, she whispered to the stars, Thank you for not taking me back. Elias, half asleep beside the fire, heard her words and smiled. He didn't understand everything about her world, but he understood her heart, and that was enough. The days after the ship's departure were quiet, almost too quiet. The wind still brushed over the sand dunes, and the old farm tools still rested against the wooden shed. But something had changed. Elias and Virel no longer lived in fear of being watched. The skies, once heavy with threat, now felt open, like the beginning of something new. Virel spent her mornings helping Elias with small repairs around the ranch. Though she had come from a world of advanced machines, she found a strange joy in doing things by hand. She liked the rhythm of it, the sound of tools, the feel of earth, the scent of sweat and sunlight. Elias would laugh softly when she struggled with simple things like hammering a nail straight or feeding the animals, but she would always smile and try again. You learn fast, Elias would say. I learn from watching you, she'd reply. At night they would sit outside under the endless sky. The stars stretched across the heavens like a great tapestry. Sometimes Virel would point to them, naming the ones from her world. The twin sons of Lysara, the crystal belt of Arian, the rings of Deleth. Her voice carried a mixture of pride and sorrow, the sound of someone who missed her home but knew she couldn't return. Elias listened quietly, his eyes on her more than the stars. Do you ever wish to go back? He asked one evening. She shook her head slowly. No, there is nothing left there for me. I was a widow even before they punished me. My bondmate died in the council's wars. Everything I was, everything they wanted me to be, ended with him. But here, she looked at him. Here I found life again. Elias didn't speak right away. He simply reached over and held her hand. They didn't need many words anymore. Their silence said everything. As time passed, Virel began to change. Her once metallic skin tone softened into a pale, warm hue, closer to human color. The glow that once surrounded her body faded, replaced by something subtler, something alive and grounded. The bond she had formed with Elias wasn't just emotional. It was changing her, merging her nature with his. One afternoon, as they worked under the sun, Elias noticed her stumble slightly. He dropped the tool in his hand and ran to her side. Virel, are you all right? She took a deep breath and smiled faintly. Just dizzy. The air feels heavier today. Elias guided her inside, helping her sit down. Her pulse felt different, slower, more human. He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad one. Over the following weeks, her strength faded a little, but her warmth grew stronger. She began to laugh more, to hum softly when she worked, to enjoy the taste of food she once found strange. She became more alive in every sense. One night, she stood at the window looking out at the moon. Do you know what I used to fear the most? She said softly. What? Elias asked. Time, she whispered. On Lasara, we didn't age like humans do. We stayed the same for centuries. But here I feel time moving through me. Every day feels precious. Every hour matters, and that is beautiful. Elias came closer, his voice quiet. You're saying that growing old doesn't scare you? She turned and smiled. Not when I know who I'll grow old with. From that day, Elias noticed something else. She began leaving small things behind. A piece of jewelry on the shelf. A mark she carved into the wooden wall. A message etched softly into metal. Almost as if she wanted to leave traces of herself everywhere, just in case. Then came the night of the storm. It began with thunder rolling across the horizon. Rain poured down in heavy sheets and lightning flashed over the desert. Elias tried to secure the doors, but the wind was too strong. Suddenly, the generator failed and the lights went out. In the darkness, he called out, Virel, I'm here. Her voice answered from behind him. He turned to see her standing near the window, the faint shimmer of her old Lysarin light returning, glowing softly in the shadows. What's happening? Elias asked, his heart racing. The bond, she said quietly. It's reaching its full circle. The energy between us, it's balancing. It's why I've been changing. He didn't understand completely, but he could see that her glow wasn't frightening this time. It was gentle, calm. The storm outside raged, but inside it felt peaceful. She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. Elias, you gave me something my world never could. A heart that beats not for duty but for love. You made me see beauty in imperfection. Elias took her hand, afraid. Don't talk like this. You're not leaving me. She smiled softly, tears in her eyes. I'm not leaving. I'm becoming part of this world, part of you. The light grew brighter, wrapping around them both like a warm wave. The sound of thunder faded. The house seemed to disappear. For a moment, Elias felt weightless, caught between two worlds. When he opened his eyes, the storm had ended. The air was clear again. The first light of dawn shone through the broken clouds. He looked around, searching for her, but she wasn't there. Only her pendant lay on the floor, glowing faintly before fading into stillness. Elias fell to his knees, clutching it in his hand. His heart ached with an emptiness deeper than words. For hours he sat there, the rising sun painting the desert in gold. He didn't move. He couldn't. But as the light touched his skin, he noticed something. A faint shimmer spreading across his arms, the same soft glow that used to surround Virel. He stood up, eyes wide, and stepped outside. The desert wind brushed against him gently, almost like a touch. Then he heard it. Her voice, Elias, I am still here. It wasn't coming from the air. It came from within him, from the bond. Her presence wasn't gone. She had merged with him, her essence now part of his very being. He smiled through his tears. You didn't leave me after all. The pendant in his hand warmed gently, pulsing like a heartbeat. From that day forward, Elias lived differently. He spoke to her in quiet moments, felt her guidance in the wind, her warmth in the sunlight. The loneliness that once haunted him was gone forever. Years later, travelers who passed by his ranch would tell strange stories, how on certain nights, a faint silver light could be seen glowing from the small house in the desert. They said a man lived there who spoke softly to the stars, as if someone was listening, and maybe someone was, because love like theirs didn't fade with time. It became something eternal, something that could not be taken, punished, or erased. She had come to him as a sentence, but she became his greatest treasure, and together, in ways beyond words, they continued to live. One soul, two hearts, across the stars forever.